Leggett. This is Gabriella Lowgren and Jessica Fong, and thank you for coming to our session called Stories That Haunt and Heal, Mental Health and Game Narrative. We ask that you hold your questions and applause to your end. We only have half an hour for this session, and it is pretty deep. We're going to have a breakout area, which is mentioned on the last slide, for us to continue the conversation if you would like to join us. We just want to talk to let you all know that we are going to be discussing some pretty heavy subject matter here. It is some mental health issues, post-traumatic stress disorder, and domestic abuse, disordered eating, and sexual assault. And one of the reasons why we need to talk about serious games is because we all have a preconceived idea of what a game is. In serious games, the primary purpose is to not just entertain, but also to explore subjects that are different from us. All right, so we're going to go in order. It'll be myself, then Gabriella, and then Jessica. So if you ladies would like to have a seat. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our game called Lily Bard, The Body in Shakespeare Park. I run an indie studio north of Toronto, and I focus on making narrative games for women over 30. In fact, my target demographic are women who enjoy reading more than they enjoy playing games. And they all focus on female protagonists. I often get asked why. Why not, I have to say. So our focus is on making impactful stories that will make people cry, make people have emotions, and most importantly, we have built a narrative game engine to help empower storytellers. We've worked with children as young as 8 and adults into their 60s and 70s. So let's talk a little bit about The Body in Shakespeare Park. It is a point-and-click narrative game, and the center character, her name is Lily Bard, and she is a sexual assault survivor. So quick story. When I first read the novel so this is based from Charlaine Harris's series, the Lily Bard series, and I remember asking, we'd like to have the rights to this, and I read the book. I'm like, wow, you know what? Games needs a kick-ass woman, and not to exploit, but to explore the subject matter of PTSD and sexual violence. And how do we craft this game specifically to make sure that we are not re-triggering survivors? What are the narrative devices that we use in the game? Who gets to write this story? Well, when you're an indie games company, sometimes you run out of money and then you take the people that are willing to work on your... Anybody ever had that experience? Sometimes you take on people that might not be the best fit. Well, we ended up having 2 guys starting to write this game. That wasn't going to go very well because I felt like that would really not fit the authenticity piece. And we've gone through a couple of writers. I am now writing the game. And I'm also a survivor of sexual assault. So it's really important that we are mindful of who is telling the narrative of these atypical stories. So some of the elements in the game itself that we are trying to imbue the player with a sense of what is the trauma, what is the anxiety that Lily is going through, are the use of her daily diaries. So for those of you not familiar with the story itself, it opens up on a body in the park, hence the name of the game. And Lily has a choice that deviates from the novel. So think of it as your choose your own adventure. And every decision that she makes does have a knock-on effect, including in her diaries, in the flashbacks that she has. Also, how do you craft the character relationships between the players and the NPCs is heavily stated by the kind of relationship that she has with them. Everything of her history and her past judges, so there's slut shaming in this book, which is kind of interesting. There are complex relationships between Lily being an older woman and a younger man. Now, we could dive really deep into that. We don't have time for that. But, it's Lily trying to explore and understand her own relationship with her sexuality. The idea being that by the end of this game, she will have found her way through herself. She will have healed herself, or the players will have a strong feeling that she has done that. So the artistic approach, I'm actually going to be showing quite a bit of the art from the game. And when we first started out, small budget, it grew. The scale of the game grew, And so we started off with full color, and initially our trigger art was going to be in black and white. And somebody had made a comment, I think it was like an Indiecade judge, and they're like, I don't like that. And I realized I don't like it either. So I'm going to show you the monochromatic instead. And we tried to move away from this idea that PTSD was horrific, because I think we can agree that a lot of people are dealing with trauma on a regular basis. Let's normalize it rather than make it horrify it. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the intentional camera angles that we used. And very importantly, even though in the book in chapter 5 it explicitly details her abduction and her assault by multiple people, we made a choice as narrative designers not to include that. We also made the choice not to include specific images, which I will be showing you, but I will add a trigger warning prior to showing that to you. Because we've all seen those images before in film and TV, we do not need to see it again. So this is when she first goes to the park, she sees the hand if she chooses to unwrap the body. This was originally the art style that we had, which, as you can sort of see, is like this Walking Dead kind of zombie image. And we ultimately went to the monochromatic. With this image, it's a flashback of her when she hears a radio announcement about an abduction. And if you notice where the barrel of the gun is aimed at, it's not aimed at you, the player, it's just slightly off to the side. So while you are playing as Lily, you are not meant to be Lily. It is not your experience. You are experiencing a story outside of yourself. The same thing with this when Lily attacks, somebody leaves a gun for her and she does kill her attacker. You were seeing it as an out-of-body experience. Just quickly, I was at the Grace Hopper conference as a speaker last October, and I don't know if you'll recall the Christine Blasey Ford testimony against the Supreme Court Judge Kavanaugh. I was showing this slide the day that she was giving testimony. It is a fantasy scene of Lily's because she did not get to testify against her kidnapper and assault people. So it's very powerful, and I think we have an opportunity in our games to share powerful stories. So the next slide does have the graphic depiction of rape, and I think I may have forgot to say at the beginning of the talk, if you feel like you need to leave the room and take care of yourself, we understand there's no judgment, because we will be diving a little bit more into other topics that might be disturbing as well. So this image specifically, I chose not to include in the game. You can see the 3D render at the top, and then the painted image on the bottom, and again, as a woman who has experienced this, I didn't feel it was necessary to include that in a game about sexual assault. We have seen it time and time again. We do not need to reinforce it. And for me, it's damaging to survivors. And it made me uncomfortable. And that ultimately is not the intent of the story. So Lily, like many survivors, is haunted by her past. And the narrative structure of the game is meant to be the holistic approach, so that players can understand healing mechanisms and coping mechanisms. We all have coping mechanisms, whether or not we realize it or not, and I think having them in game form is very healing for a lot of people. So there are nods to therapy, cognitive behavior, physical behavior, and it also underlines that we're all on our own journey and there's no specific timeline for healing. So I'm gonna pass this over to Ella.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabriella Lowgren, though if you decide you want to come and have a chat to me later, please feel free to call me Ella. So just a little bit about me before I move on to talk about Shrinking Pains is that I am a communications manager by day, and by night I run a small indie team, and we focus on making games that explore mental health issues. Basically, our goal is to release these games for free because I don't want them to ever be pay-gated so that anyone can access them and have an experience. Also, I believe that games are an amazing tool to build empathy and understanding in players, and that is my primary goal when I make these mental health games for free. The first game that we made is the one I'm going to be talking about, and that is, it's still here. We'll talk about Shrinking Pains. So very quickly, I'll give you a brief rundown of what it's about. It is a semi-autobiographical visual novel, and it is about disordered eating, like specifically anorexia. And one thing that is important to note is that I wrote this very much from a place of my own experience because I'm a recovered anorexic. The visual novel itself is written in second person because I think it's really important to explore the idea and to show that disordered eating is not an explicitly gendered mental illness. It's actually something that affects a lot more people and a lot more diverse people than the public is necessarily aware of. And more men and people that identify as non-binary are actually seen having it within the last 5 years. There's been a significant rise. I was also very interested by the impact of mental health issues on relationships. It's almost like we frame mental illness sometimes as something that happens in a vacuum, as if it has its own space. But the reality is, when someone suffers, the people around them have to pick up the slack and take on a lot more than they necessarily are able to at a time if they also have issues in their lives. And I wanted to explore that in this game. The game is also a series of snapshots. It's not a fun game to play. In fact, it can be quite harrowing. It is a little bit disturbing. I also believe that games don't have to be fun to be valuable, and we can make these experiences without exploiting them, while also showcasing the reality of what someone is suffering or experiencing. Also, having these sustained little moments within the game mimics what it's like to have an eating disorder, because stereotypically you lose time and you lose moments, and it keeps the game moving quite quickly and the playtime short. Because the game is not fun to play and it can be quite triggering, I didn't want it to be too long in length, so it would be a bit more easily digestible. So the artistic approach, I will go through this a little bit more quickly. My art is not as beautiful as Jean's art, so just heads up on that one. Shrinking Pains is actually a game jam game that we then polished and released. So all of the art assets were made in 48 hours, so just keep that in mind, everyone. There are a few things that I'm really happy with the art, and that is how it mimics having an eating disorder. As we go through, you'll notice that a lot of key details are dropped from frames as the protagonist and their illness gets worse through the narrative. You'll see that the field of vision closes in, and though you won't be able to see it here, there are sound effects that signal when the player is engaging in destructive and risky behaviour. So this is from the beginning of the game. This is one of the options for your partner. You can choose the gender expression of your partner as well. It's all written in second person and the writing is not explicitly gendered, so anyone that plays the game can feel more attached to the protagonist and have a closer sense of what they're experiencing. And as you play through, you'll notice, see, got some details. Oh, now they're going away. And then as you keep playing through, it gets sparser and sparser, and they start losing more and more time between each of the snapshots. You can see it here too. A lot of people didn't realise that the detail was going away, even though I purposely brought it back to the ceiling fan, but that's fine. It's all good. You can see it again here. There's food in the fridge, which is already not very detailed. And then you can see it's nearly completely gone here. One thing that I also want to note is that there are two options on this screen. There's eat nothing, or down here it actually says eat celery, but it is completely blurred out. And when you go to click that bubble, it actually gets smaller and smaller until you can't click it anymore. And I wanted to do this to demonstrate the lack of agency that people that have eating disorders suffer in their own life as well. So this game has a lot of illusion of choice, but there are two possible endings. These are some Steam reviews, because I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the impact that it had on the players, as well as the impact that it had on me as a creator. Steam reviews are an interesting place. Okay. I've just picked a few. My favourite is the one on the top left that says 9 out of 10 would depress again. Thought that one was quite funny. What I was really surprised by were the people that actually ended up playing this game. I wasn't sure if it would be played by people that were more mentally healthy or people that had suffered themselves, but what I experienced when I released this game, because I released it for free, there was no marketing, I just put it out there, I wanted it to be as accessible as possible. And a lot of people that ended up playing the game and then reviewing it said that it helped them feel closer to someone who was experiencing this mental illness, which I thought was very beautiful. And some people messaged me privately as well to say that they had been shown by their partners or significant people in their lives that had suffered, and it just helped deepen their understanding, and even for 20 or 30 minutes, really empathise and understand what was happening, which I thought was really, really beautiful. So it's really used as a tool to help connect people. Got a little bit more here. So as I mentioned earlier, of course, it helped build empathy in the people that played it. One thing that is interesting too is that this game had a much more significant impact on me than I thought it would. When I released this game, I had to sit down and think if I wanted to come clean about the fact that it's semi-autobiographical. Because a game like this is lent a lot of credibility when someone who is behind it is actually standing up and saying, yes, this is something that I've suffered and I have put my experiences into this game. And yes, I'm an authority to speak on this subject because I have this lived experience. However, I knew that doing that would mean that forever I would have to come to terms with the fact that I had suffered from a quite severe eating disorder, and I would be opening myself up to that discussion with so many people all throughout my life, and that would just be something that everyone would forever know about me. And I think that I finally came to the decision to commit to it and to put that on the branding of the game, because I want to destigmatize these issues as well. And it's okay to talk about them, and it's okay to recover from them, and it's okay to share these experiences with others. So it was actually really good for me, and it kept me really accountable for my own recovery. So releasing this game and making this game actually helped with my recovery, which is not something that I expected, but is something that I am extremely grateful for. So, yeah. That's the shortest spiel ever about shrinking pains. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm gonna pass it over.
Hi, my name is Jessica Fong, and I'm an illustrator, co-founder of Only Egg Studio, and game director of our first title, In the Keeper's Shadow. To talk about our work, I'm starting from when I was young. When I was little, my father was often away at work and traveling. I was at home balancing my small world against my mother's unpredictable mood and her tiger mother discipline. To the outside world, she seemed kind and nice. The mask that my mother wore was so convincing that few ever thought anything wrong. I didn't talk about what happened behind closed doors, with no other eyes watching. I felt stuck in a limbo, resigned to the fact that this is how things have been and always will be. Early on, I had a primal need to draw. It was a constant that I could control. I drew characters that I liked or ones that I wished to be, and a particular girl avatar started to form. I could not draw well, but it didn't matter because it made sense when nothing else did. In high school, an art teacher saw something in the lines that needed to be expressed. With a safe space and support, I began to build a visual library, drawing the things that haunted me to have tangible evidence that what I was feeling living with my mother was valid. I did a collection of artwork and story notes of a girl forever wandering a city, trying to find reason and purpose behind herself and her cluttered surroundings. Eventually, an investigation into our life spread revelations among our family. All of this led to my father, mother, and I having a confrontation around our dinner table. Confessions of the years of mental and physical abuse my younger sister and I had endured were met unapologetically by my mother, who told my father, "Just be happy you were not there." I recall the time she and I were the only ones at home, arguing about my academics, and I found myself standing in the kitchen holding a knife to my stomach. The impossibility of overcoming disappointment and her wishing I had never been born and telling me to go ahead and do it. I had wanted to end my life so badly in that moment, to prove the lengths I would go wanting her to be proud or satisfied with me. In an incident where my father thought he was having a heart attack after days of arguing with our mother and high blood pressure, telling her to call an ambulance, and she told him to call them yourself and left him alone. His blood had almost turned white when the nurse was able to see him. Learning of my sister's past with thoughts of suicide, all of this was terrifying to us. Coming to terms with the things that we felt we had needed to handle alone, and how close we all came to losing each other and no one the wiser. I asked our mother something I had never asked her before. "Do you love us?" And it was just silence. Life is war, she tells us, and no one is on your side, telling me that when I am old, I will remember and appreciate that I am here because of her, as she had for her father. People talk about moments where their life ended and began again. That was one for me. I committed myself to pursuing studio art in college, and I cut myself off from her. The writings of Christine Ann Lawson taught me how children of abusive parents can understand and manage in the aftermath. I learned from Abe Arkoff's publications on the psychology of growth, and art history became a never-ending stream of resources and inspiration. The memories of people preserved by their artistry. I had also grown up with games, and I thought that I could translate my visual expressions that had once been a fairly lonely endeavor into a shareable one. I started developing concept art, game designs, and story under the title Keeper and the Girl. I scrawled annotations in every line and margin in my class notebook. The girl in my artwork had discovered a new place, an experience with plant life and color, and one that I had not painted before. She was there meeting other characters, and she wasn't entirely alone. After college, I founded Lonely Egg Studio with my partner, and we worked on In the Keeper's Shadow with a small team where my previous Keeper and the Girl work and personal experiences would be retold. It's an intimate hand-painted adventure game currently in development, where you play as a young, inquisitive girl named Emmy as she explores the crumbling and war-torn city that she's called home. The narrative touches on themes of parental relationship and legacy. The game focuses on Emmy's inner dialogue, understanding and grasp of her own agency as the player explores and pushes the narrative momentum forward. In the early concepting stage, my intention for the game was for it to be a window into my experience, of what I remember and how I lived and survived. But the creative team noticed uncertainty in the premise. They asked whether or not the game story was a one-to-one reflection of what happened to me. And to this, I was defensive and confused. After I had time to think, though, I felt that repeating the experiences was not the answer to me. I don't want to just relive my past. There were many nights that I broke down and debated with my partner over this question, because it was hard coming to terms with it, because I felt that not portraying the experiences as they were or very close to it was somehow betraying my younger me or leaving her behind. I realized I was still restricted by the story of what happened in that house with my mother, that I had trapped myself in what I knew because it was comfortable. What was beyond the walls of that home? I saw Emmy, myself, going somewhere and becoming someone. The story would draw from and evolve from my past. Emmy lives in a city partially cared for by a mechanical keeper named Idna. Our team is focused on ways in which Idna has a mental control over Emmy. There are no graphic depictions of violence to the main character, and even though those things may have happened to me, we felt it did not serve to meaningfully portray the depths of their relationship in the game's story. Our game uses dark surrealism, pulling from Lovecraftian, folkloric, and cosmic horror, using the idea of the terribly sublime, things that hover between being beautiful and unsettling, to push the appearance of it almost being a psychological mindscape outside of a place or time. These metaphors could translate my feelings to others better than a true-to-life portrayal. And the gameplay mechanics are tailored around the narrative and symbolic context of each story arc or scene, like using a moth to light the darkness or point-and-click style examination to find clues, solving puzzles and learning more about the world. But more important than any specific action is Emmy's blossoming confidence and growing agency. We shared the game's progress at a local convention, and an attendee named Audrey, a gamer and blossoming creator, leaves this message for our team and devs. I'm glad that there are people brave enough to bring up the concept of mental health into games, especially if it's driven from personal experience. To those who are unaware, it brings the issue into a new light, and for those who find specific things familiar, it tells them that they aren't alone. I have looked hard at myself and found something beautiful to pursue that grounds me while I battle with the things that wish to drown me. It provides a tangible way for me to connect with the world and myself that I can understand. I would not be here if not for the support of people in my life and people like our team who strive for better. But to those that do not have those privileges, the number of voices that we have lost or may lose unsettles me. I think back to when I was little with no platform to express, or belittled for my work and not truly listened to, or even put down by peers. The line between life and art for me is blurred, and I cannot forget that the act of expressing a personal story can be equally, if not more important, than the product that might result from it. I want to support fellow creators as we not just make empathetic games, but strive together to build a more empathetic development process. Thank you.
So I think you can get a sense that the three of us are trying to tackle some pretty heavy stuff in our games, and we are building in fun elements to our games so that it's not a dour fest. I'm particularly fond of really bad puns, so you will laugh at least once or twice when you play our games. Why do we need to be talking about this kind of content? It is time. You know, we're seeing cultural shifts. We're seeing the emergence of indie games turning into a space with tools that are easy for creators to use to tell biographical stories. We're coming on the edge of the wave of Depression Quest and That Dragon Cancer. There's so many great stories out there. Stories are what make us human, and digital media is the future.
One thing that makes it a lot easier to get these games out there and to have them respected is also that there is a really big push within video games right now. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but a lot of creators are really trying to get video games recognised as an art form more so than just as a mode of entertainment, which is why we mentioned serious games earlier and how an experience can be playable without the need to be fun. And we're seeing a lot of push, and we're seeing a lot of results. The BAFTAs just gave out heaps of awards for games, which was fantastic, and acknowledges that it has a really important place in our societal consciousness as well. Also, there's a lot of research emerging about the empathy-building power of games, and how, unlike more traditional forms of media, such as TV, television, radio, where you're passively consuming a narrative, in a video game, you are actively participating in a narrative, and you are that much closer to an experience, and you can build empathy a lot more rapidly because of that. When you're the one that is living the experience to a certain degree, you can get so much closer than when you are just hearing about it or reading it or digesting something else that somebody has already presented for you.
So if you're looking to find us, you can find us on our Twitter. We're fairly active, the three of us. And we would invite you to come to the wrap-up area, which is in the West Hall, overlook 3022 and 3024 is where we'll be. If you have questions, please bring them to us. We're happy to answer them. And I hope that you enjoyed our conversation this afternoon. You will be getting your emails with your evaluations. If you'd like to see us dive deeper into this next year, please rate us accordingly so that we'll be invited back to speak.
We actually smashed through this pretty quickly, and we have a few more minutes than we'd realised. I think we have 4 whole minutes for questions, if anyone wants to. I'm assuming that you come to the microphone.
If you want to run to the microphone. I see one. Give it up.
Hello. Oh, okay.
Hi.
So I noticed amongst the three of you, you guys had a really interesting range of, I sound so weird on this, sorry, of artwork being very literal versus being very figurative. And I was wondering, how do you kind of draw that line, and how do you think it affects the player in terms of you were saying initially, you didn't want to show a lot of the images because you found them too graphic and stuff. Do you think that the more figurative showing and illustrative style is a little better at guiding the player toward a healing space? Or I just want to hear what your
I think for me, when we went with the art style, I was thinking about my target demographic, women over 40, and the kinds of games that they're currently playing. That's one thing that I love about being a developer and a publisher, is seeing a lot of different art styles, but I felt like this is a Nancy Drew meets Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. I need to stay in that realism space. But one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with these two beautiful ladies is because I'm madly in love with their stories, and I'm particularly obsessed with this woman's art. I love that we can tell deep, meaningful stories with such a range of aesthetic. It's very effective what she's done in Shrinking Pains.
Just on the note of Shrinking Pains quickly, I made one big stylistic choice aside from making the details disappear as you play through, and that is that we never show the player character's body. And I thought this was really important because we didn't want to romanticize an eating disorder. We didn't want to promote that you had to look a certain way or weigh a certain amount to have an eating disorder as well. So it's not always just the figurative versus the literal. It's also what you choose to show and what you choose not to show, which I think is something that is important to also consider.
Do you want to add to that?
No. My time.
We still have a minute and a half. I can't believe we got through 3 games in half an hour, but we have time for one more question. Please.
That was all wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing such personal things. And my question is sort of related to what you were just talking about, but maybe more from either a research or resources perspective. How do you know what might be a trigger? I mean, some is obvious, but the more subtle of how much you should present and how much while still remaining creative. Did you have consultants, or was there resources that you had?
Thank you very much for asking that question, because as Ella was speaking, I was thinking I forgot to mention that. So specifically with us, we are also speaking with other rape survivors and people who experience PTSD, but as well we are working with counselors to make sure that we're doing our due diligence. because I think it's very important when all of us are trying to tackle this content that the people who tell the story is very important, but that we're backing it up by knowledgeable resources when we are digging this deep to the human psyche.
Terrific. Thank you.
That's something that, so I'm going to jump in here too.
Yeah.
It's something that could have an entire talk unto itself, is where is the moral line with creators when we are going through these issues and talking about some really heavy subject material. And the reality is you do need to consult with people if you don't have lived experiences, and it is hard to know where to draw the line. I mentioned that Shrinking Pains it's hard to play. It's harrowing. It's why it's short. It's why I don't show the sufferer's body. But it is something that is likely exceedingly triggering to someone who has had an eating disorder. And a big part of that is being really upfront with your content warnings and being honest about what is going to happen in the game. And that might just be highlighting everything like very quickly at the beginning of the game, or having a way that you can access that information easily. And it's really down to a case-by-case basis. And as I said, if you don't have lived experiences, obviously consult with people. Like personally, Shrinking Pains is something that has a lot of my own story in it, but more than half the team had suffered from disordered eating. So it was a collective effort of our experiences and what we felt was like the core underlying issue when you have an eating disorder. So yeah, I think that it is a bit of a case-by-case basis, but as long as we approach it with like kindness, we can make experiences that are like easier to digest, or we can make experiences for art's sake that is harder, as long as there is value in it. If that makes sense. Yeah?
Just so well.
All right, so if you'd like to join us for a wrap-up, please do. And please don't forget to fill out those evaluation forms. They really mean a lot to us. And thank you for taking the time to come to our talk.
Thank you.